The morning mist clung to the old military cemetery like a ghost unwilling to let go. The air was thick with the scent of damp grass and aged stone, the kind of quiet that made footsteps sound like echoes from another time. Colonel Raymond Ellis, 99 years old, stood at the iron gates, his gnarled fingers tightening around the handle of his suitcase. Inside, it lay the only things he'd brought with him: a faded photograph, a tattered uniform hat, and an unopened letter, one he'd carried for 8 decades. His bones ached from the journey, his breath shallow from the weight of what he was about to do. But he had made a promise, and Raymond Ellis was a man who kept his promises, no matter how long it took. The path to Samuel Hayes's grave was uneven, each step a battle against time itself. Raymond's cane sank slightly into the soft earth as he moved forward, his eyes scanning the rows of white headstones. He had spent years searching for this place, decades haunted by the belief that his best friend had vanished into the chaos of war, his body never recovered. But fate, in its cruel irony, had hidden the truth in plain sight: a clerical error, a misplaced record, a name misspelled in some forgotten archive. It wasn't until a historian's email last week, subject line, "Possible match," that Raymond learned Samuel had been buried here all along, and now here he was. The headstone was simple, weathered by years of rain and wind. Private Samuel Hayes, 1922-1944. Beloved comrade. Raymond's throat tightened. Comrade. Such a small word for what they had been. They'd met as boys in basic training, 2 kids who didn't know the first thing about war but swore they'd watch each other's backs. And they had, until that night in 1944 in the dense forests of France, when gunfire split the darkness and Raymond had last seen Samuel diving into the fray, shouting at him to run, just run. He'd carried the guilt of surviving ever since. Kneeling was harder than it used to be, but Raymond managed, his joints protesting as he lowered himself onto the damp earth. He set his hat aside, fingers trembling as he reached into his coat pocket. The letter, yellowed with age, still sealed, felt heavier than it should have. Samuel had pressed it into his hand hours before the ambush. "If something happens, give this to my family," he'd said. But there had been no family to give it to. Or so Raymond had thought. With a shaky breath, he broke the seal. The paper crackled as he unfolded it, the ink faded but legible. And as Raymond began to read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper, the words unraveled a truth he'd never expected. "Dear Ellie, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home. But I need you to know, you're not alone. There's a little girl in Albany, Lillian. She's yours. I never got to hold her, but she has your eyes." Raymond's hands shook. Samuel had a daughter? The world seemed to tilt, the past rewriting, itself in front of him. How had he never known? How had... A soft voice cut through his thoughts. "You must be Colonel Ellis." Raymond turned, his heart pounding. Standing behind him, her face streaked with quiet tears, was a woman, mid-60s, with sharp, kind eyes. Eyes he'd seen before. "I'm Lillian," she said. Raymond's breath caught in his chest. For a moment, he wondered if the years had finally played a trick on him, if the ghosts of his past had stepped out of the fog to meet him. But the woman, standing before him, was real. The way the morning light caught the silver in her hair, the way her hands clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers, none of it was imagined. And those eyes, Samuel's eyes. Lillian took a hesitant step forward, her gaze flickering between Raymond and the grave. I didn't know if you'd really come," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "When the cemetery called to say someone had requested his records, I hoped it was you." Raymond struggled to find words. 80 years of silence, of carrying a secret he hadn't even known was his to bear. And now, here she was, Samuel's daughter. His daughter. The weight of it pressed down on him, and for the first time in decades he felt his legs tremble not from age, but from emotion. He reached out, bracing himself against the headstone. Lillian was at his side in an instant, her hand on his arm. "Easy," she murmured. "Let's sit." She guided him to a nearby bench, its wood worn smooth by time. Raymond clutched the letter tighter, the paper crinkling in his grip. "How did you—" "No," he managed. Lillian sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of the bouquet in her lap. "My mother never talked about him. When I asked, she'd just say he was a good man who didn't come home from the war. It wasn't until after she passed that I found an old box of letters, ones he'd sent her. His name wasn't on them. Just Ellie signed at the end. I spent years trying to figure out who he was." She paused, glancing at Raymond. "Then, last month, a military historian tracked me down. Said there was a chance my father's grave had been mislabeled all this time, and that the man who might have known him was still alive." Raymond exhaled slowly. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one he could hardly believe. Samuel had loved someone, Ellie, enough to keep her a secret, even from him, and that love had left behind a life, a daughter, a story untold. Lillian turned to him, her expression searching. "The historian mentioned you carried something of his. A letter?" Raymond nodded, his fingers uncurling to reveal the fragile pages. "He gave it to me the night before." His voice trailed off. The memories of that ambush were still sharp. The smell of gunpowder, the shouts, the last glimpse of Samuel disappearing into the smoke. Lillian reached out, her fingertips brushing the edge of the letter. "May I?" Raymond hesitated. This was Samuel's last message, his final words. But if anyone had the right to them, it was her. He handed it over. As Lillian read, her lips moved silently, her brow furrowing. Then, abruptly, she stopped. Her breath hitched. Raymond watched as her eyes widened as the color drained from her face. "What is it?" he asked, leaning forward. Lillian looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "He knew." "Knew what?" Raymond's pulse quickened. She swallowed hard. "He knew he wasn't coming back." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Samuel hadn't just written a letter, he'd written a goodbye, and then, from the folds of the paper, something small and metallic slipped into Lillian's palm. A locket. Raymond's heart stopped. Because he recognized it. The locket was tarnished. With age, its delicate chain coiled like a sleeping serpent in Lillian's palm. But the intricate engraving on the front, a tiny, winged heart, was unmistakable. Raymond had seen it 1,000 times before, resting against Samuel's chest beneath his uniform, a silent companion through every battle. His hands trembled. As he reached out, his voice rough with disbelief. He kept it. Lillian turned the locket over, her fingers tracing the hidden clasp. "You know this?" Raymond nodded slowly, the memories rushing back like a tide. It was his. Good luck charm. He swore it kept him alive. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped him. Guess it ran out that night. The click of the locket opening was soft, barely audible over the distant call of a morning bird. Inside, folded neatly to fit the tiny space, was a photograph, so old the edges had begun to dissolve into yellowed lace. A woman's face smiled. Up at them, her features blurred by time, but her warmth still palpable. Ellie. Lillian breathed. Raymond studied the photo, the ghost of a young woman he'd never met staring back. "Your mother?" Lillian nodded, her thumb brushing the image. She was beautiful. A pause, then quieter. She never remarried, never even dated, just waited. The words settled between them, heavy with the weight of a love that had outlived the man who inspired it. Raymond's chest ached. All these years he'd thought Samuel had died alone, his story unfinished. But he'd left behind more than just a name on a headstone. He'd left a legacy. Lillian snapped the locket shut, her eyes glistening. "There's something else in the letter." She held it out to Raymond, pointing to a paragraph near the bottom. "He mentions you." Raymond took the page, his aging eyes struggling to focus on the faded ink. "Ellie, if you're reading this, tell Ray I'm sorry. I should have told him about you, about Lillian. But I couldn't risk it, not with the way things were back then. You know how they treated mixed families after the war. I couldn't drag him into that. But if he's still kicking around, give him the locket. He'll understand." Raymond's vision blurred. Mixed families. The truth crashed over him, like a wave. Samuel hadn't just kept Ellie a secret to protect her. He'd kept her a secret to protect Raymond. Because if the army had found out Samuel had a black sweetheart back home, and that Raymond knew, it would have ruined them both. Lillian was watching him carefully. "You didn't know." It wasn't a question. Raymond shook his head, the guilt of 80 years pressing down on him. "I would have stood by him, no matter what." A sad smile touched Lillian's lips. "He knew that. That's why he didn't tell you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "I think this belongs to you." Raymond took it, unfolding it with unsteady hands. It was a photograph, one he hadn't seen in decades. Him and Samuel, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning like the reckless boys they'd been. Written on the back in Samuel's messy scrawl, "Brothers to the end." ITT. The photograph felt like a punch to Raymond's chest. He could almost hear Samuel's laughter in that frozen moment, smell the cheap beer they'd smuggled into the barracks that night. They'd been so young, faces unlined by war, eyes bright, with the invincibility of boys who didn't yet know how fragile life could be. Lillian watched the emotions play across his face. "My mother kept that hidden in her Bible," she said quietly. "I found it when I was cleaning out her things. At first, I thought it was just some old army buddies. But then, I saw the way she touched the edges so much the corners were worn soft." Raymond traced the outline of Samuel's face with his thumb, the paper brittle under his touch. "We were more than buddies," he admitted, the words thick in his throat. "Closer than brothers. The kind of bond you only get when someone saves your life a dozen times over." A gust of wind rustled the trees around them, sending a shower of cherry blossoms drifting over the graves. One landed on the photograph, a pale pink petal resting right over Samuel's heart. Lillian hesitated, then asked the question, "Raymond." Could see burning in her eyes. What really happened that night? The night The memories came rushing back, not as faded recollections but vivid as yesterday. The smell of damp earth and gun oil. The way the moonlight had glinted off Samuel's dog tags as he turned to face Raymond with that reckless grin. "We were supposed to be the lucky ones," Raymond began, his voice low. "Our unit was pulling out at dawn. Just one last patrol through the woods near St. Lo. But the Germans had set up an ambush." His fingers tightened around the cane between his knees. "Samuel saw them first. Shoved me into a ditch just as the machine guns opened fire. Last thing he said to me was, 'Run, Ellie, get to the rendezvous point.'" Lillian's breath caught. "Ellie, but that's your mother's name," Raymond finished, realization dawning. "He wasn't telling me to run. He was giving me a message." The pieces clicked together with almost physical force. That night, bleeding and half-conscious in a French farmhouse, Raymond had assumed the fading whisper of "Ellie" was just the delirium of shock. But Samuel had been trying to tell him, to pass on his final words for the woman he loved. Lillian pressed a hand to her mouth. All these years, and you never knew. Raymond stared at the headstone, the dates etched there a brutal arithmetic, 22 years alive, 80 years dead. I failed him twice, he whispered, first by not saving him that night, then by not finding you sooner. A warm hand covered his. Lillian's grip was surprisingly strong, her skin calloused in ways that spoke of a life well lived. "You're here now," she said firmly, "and so am I." From her purse, she pulled out a small velvet box. When she opened it, Raymond's breath stopped. Nestled inside was a purple heart. Samuel's purple heart. "They sent it to my mother 6 months after he died," Lillian explained, running a finger along the ribbon's faded edges. "She never took it out of this box, said medals were for people who needed proof of love." Raymond reached out, then hesitated. "May I?" At her nod, he lifted the medal with reverent fingers. As he turned it over, his thumb found the tiny engraving on the back, not the standard issue inscription, but something hand-carved in delicate letters. For Ellie. Always. The sob tore from Raymond's chest before he could stop it, raw and aching. 80 years of grief, of survivor's guilt, of unanswered questions, all collapsing in on themselves under the weight of this final revelation. Lillian didn't speak. She simply wrapped her arms around the old soldier's shaking shoulders and held on tight, the morning sun warming them both as Samuel's locket dangled between them, catching the light like a promise kept at last. The weight of Samuel's purple heart in Raymond's palm felt heavier than any metal had a right to be. He ran his thumb once more over those painstakingly carved words, for Ellie, always, before gently placing it back in Lillian's velvet box. The morning had grown warmer, but a chill still clung to his bones that had nothing to do with the weather. "There's more you should see," Lillian said, wiping at her eyes before reaching into her purse again. This time she produced a small, leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age. "My mother's diary. The pages about him. Well, you'll understand." Raymond accepted the journal with trembling hands, flipping carefully to a marked passage near the middle. Ellie's handwriting flowed across the page in elegant, looping script that contrasted sharply with Samuel's rushed military scribbles. June 3rd, 1944. Sam shipped out today. He held my face in his hands like he was memorizing it. Said, if anything happens, his friend Raymond knows where to find me. But how could anyone find us when we're not even supposed to exist? The date struck Raymond like a bullet. This was written 2 weeks before. His voice failed as he did the math. 2 weeks before Samuel vanished into that French forest forever. Lillian nodded, her fingers tracing the adjacent page. Keep. Reading. June 17th. A letter from Sam. He says the war feels endless, but Raymond makes it bearable. Calls him the brother I chose. He says when this is over, the 3 of us will sit at a proper dinner table like real people. Oh, how I dream. Of that day, Raymond's vision blurred. He remembered that letter, had watched Samuel write it by flashlight in their muddy trench, teasing him about being sentimental, never imagining those words would become sacred relics. A rustling noise made them both look up. An elderly groundskeeper approached, his movements slow but deliberate. "Miss Hayes," he called out, holding up a small package. "The archives found this while you were gone. Thought you'd want it right away." Lillian accepted the parcel with quiet thanks. As the man shuffled away, she peeled back the brown paper to reveal a sealed military file stamped Confidential, 1944. Her fingers hesitated over the clasp. This was in my father's service record. The archivist said it was misfiled with another. Unit's documents. Raymond's pulse pounded in his ears. He knew that seal. Had seen it on the investigation files after the ambush. That's an after-action report. The moment Lillian opened the folder, a single photograph slid out face up onto the bench between them. It showed Samuel, but not the Samuel Raymond remembered. This Samuel was on his knees in a German field hospital, his uniform bloody but his head held high. Alive, captured, and the date stamped in the corner. July 2nd, 1944. 2 weeks after he was supposed to have died. The world tilted violently around Raymond. His cane clattered to the ground as he grabbed the photograph with both hands, his aged eyes scanning every detail. The makeshift hospital cot, the German officer standing guard, the unmistakable glint of defiance in Samuel's eyes. That face had haunted his dreams for 80 years, but never like this. Never alive after all. This can't be, Raymond choked out. They told us no one survived that ambush. They told us... Lillian's hands were shaking as she pulled out the typed report beneath the photo. Her voice trembled as she read aloud. Lieutenant Samuel Hayes, 101st Airborne, captured during night engagement near St. Lo. Listed as wounded but stable. Transferred to... She stopped abruptly, her breath catching. Raymond didn't need her to finish. He knew. Stalag Luft 4. He whispered, the name like ash in his mouth. The notorious POW camp where thousands had disappeared into unmarked graves. A terrible silence stretched between them, filled with 80 years of unanswered questions. The cheerful birdsong in the cemetery now felt like a cruel joke. Raymond stared at the photograph until his eyes burned, searching for some clue, some hint of what came after this moment. Then he noticed it. His hands, Raymond said suddenly, pointing. Samuel's fingers were curled around something small and metallic, the edge of it just visible between his bloodied knuckles. The locket. Lillian made a soft, wounded noise. He kept it with him, through all of it. Raymond's mind raced, reassembling history in real time. Samuel hadn't died in that forest. He'd been taken, which meant... They knew, Raymond said, the realization like ice in his veins. Command knew he was captured. They had to know. His voice rose, cracking with decades of buried anger. Why would they tell us he was dead? Why would they... A new voice cut through the air. Because some stories are easier to bury than explain. They turned to see the elderly groundskeeper standing a few feet away, his work gloves dangling from one hand. But his posture had changed. Straighter, sharper, his faded blue eyes suddenly alert in a way that set Raymond's instincts humming. You, Raymond breathed. The man nodded once. Corporal Daniel Briggs, 506th Infantry, though, I suppose, we weren't properly introduced back in 44. He gestured to the file in Lillian's lap. I was the one who misfiled that report. The admission hung in the air like gun smoke. Lillian stood slowly, her voice dangerously calm. You knew my father was alive. Briggs didn't flinch. Not at first. By the time we got the Red Cross list of POWs, our unit had already been redeployed. Then the brass made a decision. His jaw tightened. They said it was cleaner to let missing men stay missing, that families would rather hear their boys died heroes than lived as captives. Raymond was on his feet before he realized it, decades of military discipline the only thing keeping him from grabbing the man's collar. You let us mourn him. You let me carry that guilt. And I've carried the weight of that lie every day since, Briggs shot back, his composure cracking for the first time. When I heard Miss Hayes was searching for her father's records last month, I knew it was time. He reached into his pocket and produced a yellowed envelope. This came to the base 2 months after we thought Sam died. Never got delivered. Raymond took it with numb fingers. The postmark was smudged but legible, September 12, 1944. Stalag, Luft 4. Samuel's handwriting on the envelope was shaky but unmistakable, for Raymond Ellis. Burn if I don't make it home. The world narrowed to that single point. Somewhere in the distance, Lillian was asking Briggs questions, but Raymond couldn't hear them over the roaring in his ears. This letter had been written after the ambush, after capture. Samuel had survived long enough to write again. With trembling fingers, Raymond broke the brittle seal. Inside were 2 items: a lock of dark hair tied with thread, a single sheet of paper with just 6 words. Ellie and Lillian are your family now. The ground fell away beneath him. Raymond barely registered. Lillian, catching him as his knees gave out, barely felt the hot tears streaking down his weathered face. 80 years. 80 years of survivor's guilt, of nightmares, of standing at gravesides wondering what he could have done differently. And all that time, Samuel's last act hadn't been to die, but to make sure Raymond knew where he belonged. The lock of hair rested in Raymond's palm like a sacred relic, its dark strands still holding the faintest hint of chestnut under the sunlight. Lillian reached out, her fingers hovering just above it. That's mine, isn't it?" she whispered. Raymond could only nod. Samuel must have carried this tiny piece of his daughter through hell itself, through gunfire and capture and the unimaginable horrors of Stalag Luft 4. A father's love, folded into a letter like a secret prayer. Briggs cleared his throat, his weathered face etched with remorse. "There's one more thing." He pulled a small box from his jacket, this one wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. The Red Cross recovered personal effects when they liberated the camp in 45. This was among them. Lillian took the package with reverence. As the twine fell away, the oilcloth revealed a simple wooden box, its surface carved with clumsy but heartfelt letters. "For Lillian, when you're old enough to understand." Inside lay 2 objects that made her gasp. A child's silver rattle engraved to my little lion heart. A folded map of France with a single location circled in charcoal, the exact spot where Samuel had been captured. Raymond's breath caught. "He meant for you to find it," he realized aloud. The ambush site, whatever he left there. "We have to go," Lillian finished, her voice fierce with sudden conviction. She turned to Briggs. "You know where this is, don't." "You?" The old corporal nodded. "Better than anyone." A beat. "I'll drive." 3 days later. French countryside. The forest had reclaimed much of the battlefield, but the earth still remembered. Raymond felt it the moment they stepped into the clearing, that heavy, hallowed silence that lingers where too many young men took their last breaths. Briggs consulted the map, then pointed to an ancient oak. "There, that's where we last saw him." Lillian moved first, her boots sinking into the soft loam. At the tree's base, her fingers found what decades of moss and decay couldn't conceal, a rusted ammunition box wedged between the roots. The contents were preserved in wax paper, a wedding band, engraved E+, 5.643, a brittle sprig of lavender, and a final unsent letter. "Ray, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home, but I need you to know, saving you was the one good thing I did in this damn war. Raise a glass for me sometimes, and tell Lillian." The rest was illegible, the ink blurred by what might have been rain or tears. Lillian pressed the letter to her chest, her shoulders shaking. Raymond placed a trembling hand on the oak, feeling the weight of 8 decades finally lift. Somewhere above them, a breeze stirred the leaves, soft as a sigh, warm as a hand on the shoulder, and for the first time in 80 years, Raymond Ellis smiled. "Welcome home, brother."
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.